spear was used to drive off any of the infantrymen coming too close to the chariot. It could, in extreme circumstances, be used like a lance. You could get a Hittite chariot coming up behind an Egyptian chariot, and you'd go for the horses. So the shield man with his spear had a dual function: to fight other chariots and to protect against infantry.
You look at the Hittite chariots, and essentially you've got somebody with a spear, somebody with a shield, and so on. They just don't seem to have had the same brilliant conception of the chariot as a way of moving your archers very rapidly around the battlefield.
The superior speed of the Egyptian chariots gave them a great advantage. Although only carrying 2 men, they could escape their enemies quickly by moving out of range or make lightning surprise attacks. A superb ceremonial example can be seen in the Cairo Museum.
You can see what one of these ancient Egyptian chariots would have looked like from the examples preserved in the tomb of Tutankhamun. And here you typically see a very wide axle, much wider than the chariot car itself, with the wheel set very far back at the back of the cab. The cab itself is very small and very shallow, so it would have been a tight fit for both a driver and an archer to sit in one of these chariots. However, the Egyptian chariot was very lightweight and extremely maneuverable. They were essentially the F-16 fighters of their day.
Ramses II had amassed his men and their high-tech weapons. Now he was ready for battle.
We have to remember that the ancient Egyptians hadn't had the horse and chariot before the New Kingdom. So Ramesses II, with the combination of the composite bow and the horse and chariot, really did have the peak of military equipment.
Ramses II's reputation as a great military leader would rest on his success at Kadesh. But when would he? The stage was set for the Battle of Kadesh. Ramses II had prepared his forces with the finest weaponry and was ready to embark upon what would be one of ancient history's most decisive battles. He led his infantry and charioteers on a 1,000-mile journey northwards to oust the Hittites from the city of Kadesh. The power struggle between the two great societies was about to reach breaking point. In the quest to expand their empire, the Hittites had set their sights on the valuable trade routes in and out of Egypt.
The Egyptians had lost the province of Kadesh in Syria 50 years before Ramses came to the throne, and the empire had survived quite nicely without it. But the Egyptians seemed to have had an obsession with Kadesh. They couldn't let go of it. They had to get it back to save their own face.
The citadel of Kadesh sits on a tall rocky mound in the middle of a vast plain, an ideal theater of war for chariots. And that valley was a crucial and lucrative trade route. Ramesses wanted that. And that is why he marched his army nearly 1,000 miles to face King Muwatalli and take Kadesh.
When Ramses arrived on the edges of the plain below Kadesh, he knew King Muwatalli's Hittite troops were in the region. He knew he would face a force of thousands of troops and well-armed charioteers. Ramses was clearly outnumbered. His only chance of victory would be in the strategic deployment of well-armed infantrymen, and more specifically, his skilled bowmen attacking on their high-speed chariots. But what strategy did Ramses employ to ensure his archers had the advantage? The key would be the pattern of short, sharp attacks and rounds fired in quick succession. As a way of demonstrating this technique, weaponry expert Mike Loades will fire a composite bow from a chariot to show the pattern of forays undertaken by the Egyptians. For demonstration purposes, we've used a platoon of Roman soldiers who fought in a much later period but had similar shields and helmets for protection to represent the Hittites.
The chariot wasn't used like a tank. It wasn't a contact weapon for smashing through, because if you've got a dense phalanx of men and you charge with a chariot, it's got horses at the front, it's a light vehicle, there's no real weight there. After the first 2 ranks, the speed is frustrated, the chariots come to a halt, the charioteers hauled off and killed. So it's not used for that sort of contact. What it's used for is, against infantry, it needs to frustrate the movements of infantry on the battlefield to get tactical advantage. As I'm riding in, I want to see how many arrows I can drop into this block. I'm at my most vulnerable when I turn, because obviously sideways on, you've got the horse sideways on, it's an easy target for them. So I don't want to go too close to them, just as close as I dare, and make that turn as sharp as we can. And as we get away, I still want to send some shots back. Well, I got 10 arrows into that body of men. Now, 250 meters, you've got to consider riding perhaps a horse's length behind each other. You'd easily get 50 chariots in that loop. So that's a rate of about 1,000 arrows a minute. An Apache helicopter gunship only shoots 1,200 rounds a minute. I mean, it's phenomenal that this ancient technology is close to matching that. Quite extraordinary.
Superbly armed and with a well-trained force, a confident Ramses set up camp on the edges of the plain. Yet unknown to him, Muwatalli and his forces were just out of view behind the hill on the other side of Kadesh. Seeing his opportunity, Muwatalli decided to send 2,500 of his troops to attack the Egyptian camp. Just as they rounded the hill, another battalion of 1,000 Egyptians arrived. The Hittites drew their swords and slaughtered most of the Egyptian men in the chaos. Spurred on by their initial success and having made a surprise attack, the Hittites decided to move on to Ramses' camp.
The Egyptians would have known very little what was going on until suddenly the thundering chariots appeared in their midst. They were taken completely by surprise. The chariots are a good means of moving people rapidly from one place to the other, and a division of chariots coming towards you are really quite intimidating.
Accounts describe how Ramses rallied his troops and led them in a terrifying counterattack against the Hittites. Pursued by the faster Egyptian chariots, the fleeing Hittites were pushed back to their base by Ramses.
Now they were headlong helter-skelter where Ramesses was pushing them. And Ramesses' account says they had to abandon their chariots and swim for home. They swam like crocodiles, he says. It was a great psychological victory.
It's estimated that around 6,000 chariots were locked in combat at the Battle of Kadesh, as many as 20,000 soldiers fighting with advanced weaponry.
So now, on the open plain, where chariots can do what chariots need to do, Ramesses defeats them. He really wins that day and drives them across the river.
The Hittite leader had seen at first hand the ferocity and determination of Ramses and his men. Witnessing the carnage and not wishing for further bloodshed, the Hittite king Muwatalli called a ceasefire.
Ramesses then laid siege to it by surrounding the city with his troops. But it soon became clear that it was almost a no-win situation. The Hittites weren't going to give up, and Ramesses couldn't sustain a siege around the city for a long time.
Ramses declared himself the victor and returned home a great hero. The reality is, both leaders agreed to a truce.
The Battle of Kadesh wasn't a great victory for Ramesses II. These days, it's generally considered a stalemate, but he was able to turn it into a hugely important piece of propaganda. As far as the Egyptian people were concerned, he was the great victorious ruler, and he covered the temples of Egypt with these statements of his victory and his supremacy in the ancient world.
Skirmishes continued around Kadesh for another 15 years, yet no battle as fierce as the one fought by Ramses against the Hittites was fought there ever again. The Egyptians and the Hittites eventually joined forces against the civilization that loomed over both of them, the Assyrians. In a remarkable strategic move, the Egyptians and Hittites signed the first ever peace treaty in history. A copy of it is on display in the headquarters of the United Nations in New York.
And we have both accounts, the Egyptian written account, which is in Karnak Temple, and a Hittite account as well. And the two superpowers agreed to be friends.
Whatever the outcome, Ramses had transformed Egypt into the military powerhouse of the ancient world.
Ramesses was the man. Ramesses was the man of the moment. And Ramesses was the pharaoh of Egypt. and it still retained its superiority among nations of the time.
War has always been the catalyst for technological breakthroughs, and the axes, swords and knives of ancient battles lay the foundations for military technology for thousands of years. What new inventions remain to be rediscovered in modern times and make us rethink everything we thought we knew about the ancient world?